Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's NAC at Home program. My name is Nadine Heidinger, and I'm the Director of Communications at the National Arts Club. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Arts Club, we are a 501c3 nonprofit based in New York City with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, we host over 150 free programs, including exhibitions, theatrical and musical performances, lectures, and readings. To find out more about the National Arts Club, you can visit us at nationalartsclub.org, or you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. On behalf of our literary committee, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, Poetry and Black Lives Matter, featuring Gregory Pardlow, who was awarded the 2015 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry for Digest, and Patricia Smith, a nationally acclaimed poet, performer, and teacher, and the author of several books, including her most recent volume, Incendiary Art. The event will be moderated by fellow poet and author Lynn Thompson. Lynn's most recent collection of poems, Fretwork, was selected for the 2019 Marsh Hawk Press Poetry Prize. A multiple Pushcart Prize nominee, Lynn is the author of Beg No Pardon and Start With a Small Guitar. Her work has been widely published. Digest, Incendiary Art, and other volumes can be purchased from our preferred independent bookseller, Books on Call, via the link we'll be sharing in the chat. This event is presented in partnership with the Poetry Society of America. Following the discussion will be a brief Q&A, so please feel free to use the Q&A function for any questions you might have. And without further ado, let me pass it over to Lynn. Please enjoy the event.
Thank you so much, Nadine. It's really my honor to be here tonight with these two wonderful poets who are also friends. There's nothing better than to be able to introduce them both. I'm going to start by introducing them in the order in which they will read, and then they will take it away. So first up is Gregory Pardlow. As you heard, his collection Digest won the 2015 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. His other honors include fellowships from the Cullman Center at the New York Public Library, the Guggenheim Foundation, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts for Translation. His first collection, Totem, won the APR Honickman Prize in 2007, and his most recent book is Air Traffic, a memoir in essays. Pardlow is poetry editor at Virginia Quarterly Review and director of the MFA program at Rutgers University, Camden. Patricia Smith is the author of 8 poetry collections, including Incendiary Art, winner of the 2018 Kingsley Tufts Award and the NAACP Image Award, as well as the 2017 Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Incendiary Art was also a finalist for the 2018 Pulitzer Prize. Smith is a Guggenheim Fellow, a Civitilian, I hope I said that right because I really like that word, recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts grant, and a 4-time champion of the National Poetry Slam. She is a distinguished professor for the City University of New York. You're all in for a treat. Gregory, take it away.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks so much. It is such a pleasure to be reading with Patricia. This is a highlight of my pandemic for sure. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, but I think it's been even longer since we read NYU too. Yeah, we read together at NYU a number of years ago. So I've been coincidentally. By the way, I couldn't find a background that was pretentious enough, so I just decided to use my own, and so that's why you see the harp here. I had to cart it in just to. No, actually, my daughter plays harp. But coincidentally, last night I had a similar conversation, on a panel with Major Jackson, and we were talking about this very issue. So I've had some time to kind of process this a little bit, and I think what I come to is the conclusion that Black Lives Matter is, for me, and what I'm interested in. I'm sure I could find other things to say about it, but is the aesthetic part, the kind of struggle over what our landscape will look like. And I'm thinking about statues and Black Lives Matter plazas, and what we will look like. And that is how we define the pronoun we, who gets to be in it, who gets to, how we move within the boundaries of the space that we define. Richard Wright said somewhere, literature is a struggle over reality. And I think that's very true. And it reminds me of Du Bois's famous saying that he doesn't give a damn about any literature that is not propaganda, right? And I think African-American literature has long had, basically from its inception, two kind of implied imperatives. That is to uplift the race and to combat racism and white supremacy, which I consider a synonym there. But as a writer, how has Black Lives Matter influenced me? And I don't want to step on, I know we're going to have a little conversation later, but I just want to preface, I guess, my poems with this overview that I think there's a very common thread moving throughout African-American literature, African-American poetry, and that in the sense that there is not a whole lot that I think this moment is changing from my perspective. What I do think is very much up in the air and undermined is white supremacy. I think if anything, this moment is a crisis in white supremacy. And that is we just cannot, as deeply as it has been internalized in our national culture for so long, I think it's at a point now where we can see it in its most insidious forms. Systemic racism, chief among them, alongside the more overt racism. So that said, I'm gonna read actually some all new poems. And I want to start with, I guess, a poem that kind of speaks to what I'm saying here. And this poem, it's called Kayfabe, and just the background. Kayfabe is, as I'll say and tell you in the poem, is the code between professional wrestlers, and that is that they will, it's a kind of promise, a commitment to stay in character no matter what. The professional wrestler Owen Hart, many years ago, 99, which is in the title, was making an entrance, descending into the arena from the roof, and he fell and he passed away. But what was fascinating to me was that because of these norms of kayfabe, people didn't know whether or not that was part of the act, and so there was some confusion, and I think symbolically for me, this poem is my Black Lives Matter era poem, in that the crisis of whiteness or white supremacy, that is, and perhaps even whiteness, the crisis in the essentialism of race is at a point where we're not quite sure where the boundaries between reality and performance are. Kayfabe, 1999. Professional wrestler Owen Hart embodied his own omen when he battled gravity from rafters to canvas in a Kansas City stadium. Like a great tent collapsing, he fell without warning. No hoverboard, no hummingbird's finesse for the illusion of flight, no suspension of disbelief to cast his agony, the birth of virtue, in a virtual reality. An angelic entrance eclipsed when his safety harness failed. He fell out of the air sats like a wax wing duped by infinities conjured in a squeegee's mirage. Spectators wilted as the creature of grief emerged to graze on their sapling gasps and shrieks. I'd like to think that, woke free from self-hype, he realized his mask was not a shield, that he didn't spend his last attempting to method Zeno's proofs. EMTs like evangelicals huddled to spoke the hub of Hart's radiating soul as fans prayed the stunt might yet parade the emperor's threads wrestlers call kayfabe. Kayfabe, a dialect of pig Latin, lingo for the promise to drop at the laying on of hands, to take myth as history, semblance as creed, a grift so convincing it would be easy to believe it might work without someone else pulling the strings. So I'm going to read from a kind of racy. I'm only going to read the more tame sections of a racier long poem that I'm working on. Enough preamble. It's from the longer poem is called An Essay on Faith. 1. Bud-sized flames popsicle the wicks of a wax 1 in 5 atop a Dominican cake. With tango arms, we hold the wedding knife, renew the annual jibes. Our marriage is old enough to get a job. Is it devotion or inertia keeps us together? Why split gray hairs? The babies are replaced with fruitcakes. Still, we feed our instruments of joy. Chasing the Minotaur, I've lost all fear. Was it inevitable that I would resent you? I fantasize before our mingled breath exhausts the candles, an island of Whitney Houston's, the voice of my youth. Its irrepressible refrain, recalling the white caps and sea spray from that craggy shore, like the stiff peaks of meringue, framing the faces the bakery has airbrushed across this moist and delectable confection we now jab at each other's faces, fork by fork. Bathing in the milk light of the boob tube, in a house that moved like a shipwreck with lace lungs that sieved wind through midnight portals. I wormed my finger down the back of my jammies to see what the fuss was about. More business than pleasure. The forbidden horizon, like racing the devil over a waterfall. For once, my dad's asthma didn't announce him like Darth Vader emerging from the dark corridor. The shock of seeing myself x-rayed by him schismed the innocence I never had and left my body adrift in deep time, a dead star. And I saw that boy on the floor watching TV with his finger in his ass. The funhouse irony of machismo repelled my mission to schematize the Death Star I'm housed within and taught me instead to mystify the bodies of women, fattening, amplifying. And although I would have confessed to any crime just then, I learned a mind game to blur the outskirts of my vision. What we could not see, we buried deep in our conscience. Dear Lord Vader, subconscious patriarch whose shame I carry like an old condom in my wallet, your best trick was to keep me from asking where the soul resides. The famous athlete doubts the earth is round and sweet. Its magnetic navel adrift escapes like leaves turned dryly under hoof. It is autumn. Youth was beauty and its fruit is yielding quietly to flies. Eluard writes, the earth is blue like an orange. From the moon, you can watch it rot and turn to heat. And this will be the last one. So I'm sure some of you know who, a lot of you know who Tituba is. Tituba was the woman of color who miraculously was not hung in the Salem witch trials. However, she was the first person accused of witchcraft. And I'm relying in this poem on a lot of the backstory, but my theory here is that I'm trying to figure out why, out of all the people, Tituba is one who survived. And I think it has to do with the fact that she was an enslaved person and she was a woman, right? And the law just did not have a way of dealing with or even imagining her being powerful enough to commit a crime. And in that sense, she was, I'll let the poem do the talking here. Tituba, dear Justice, in your tarnished hands, calibrated to the weight of an eyelash, conjure a spell to sway the jury. Let the consolation of slavery be that Tituba confounds the law. If not above it, then beyond it. Let her, a stranger by birth and appearance, non-white and woman, escape the eyes that would hang her. What might she think to become? A flight risk floating in the fireplace, catbird in moonlight, the tumescence of smoke. Let them see a voodoo priestess or spite-filled nanny. Let fear be the lash that swims like a twig in their eyes. Let Judge Haythorne cough starshine in the face of her accusers, so that of all of the innocents, Tituba should live. Dear three-headed Hecate, remake Tituba, the unthought thought, from mud tracked across the meeting house floor, blue salt, hair of a sleeping hyena, egg whites in water. Let them see labor, but not the womb. Let them see a housemaid, but not a healer. Somewhere between witness and evidence, file her in the law books beside the talking dog, an exhibit, as she was on the auction block, the genius in their mirror. Give her the spell to stop their ears. Let her say, I am blind now, I cannot see. This will make her a stone in the stream of their vision. Ad oculos. This will make Tituba invisible. Dear Mamiwata, give her visions to whet the hysteria of her captors. A rat hunched like an avocado with feet. A hog, a red cat, his familiars. In human form, he's most often black, the devil and his counsel, the canary. Let her exhume some malevolence from under her tongue, most foul, as one might utter alone at night, encountering the black man himself looking to cut a deal on the road to paradise. Or as a woman, defenseless in her home, might summon the customs that live in the law to gird herself in daylight when the devil masquerades as a harmless birdwatcher. Dear Nemesis, let her feed them biscuits of rye, mixed with piss and ashes from the hearth, a real recipe. Let them hear the dog's voice, the way it slumped from piccolo to profundo, abyssus, abyssum, invocate. Let her feed the devil's registry, their own names to the record, condemned, 2 by 2. Let her pronounce their fates like a god. With no standing on her own behalf in this world, let her sit in judgment. Let her tip her head back and give birth through her mouth. Dear Lord, yes, like a god. Thank you.
Wait, I have to turn my.
Thank you. Thanks, Patricia.
It is so good to hear you.
Yeah.
You know, I just thought of someplace else we were. Weren't we at that kind of Buddhist-y place?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
might have been before the other things.
Yeah.
It's really good to hear. It was a very strange thing that happened a couple of minutes ago. Is my son called me, and this call came through, and I don't talk to him that often, but he's in my mind all the time. He has a little bit of a mental issue that makes him very paranoid about things. And so when he's in crowded areas, and I've been with him
when we've encountered police. And the very fact that he is uncomfortable in spaces is enough to make him a suspect in so many things. So I worry about him just walking through the world, and the fact that he came while you were actually talking about, what was going on with, and I guess looking at some of the things we're going to talk about later, I've got some things to say about Black Lives Matter. And I was trying to figure out what to read. And the perfect thing to read is something I keep reading all the time. So I don't know if I'm going to read that. Uh, I'll go back to my initial things. I have like new poems, but they're all tied to photographs, and so it's a little weird. And I'm not doing them, so I feel it's like, oh, new stuff, really? But it's fine. And thank you to the National Arts Club for the invitation. And doubly thank you for pairing me with Greg. We don't get to see each other and hear each other enough. So very thankful for that. Incendiary art. The city's streets are densely shelled with rows of salt and packaged hair. Intent on air, the funk of craven function comes to blows with any smell that isn't oil. The blare of storefront chicken settles on the skin and mango spritzing drips from razored hair. The corner chefs cue pork, decide again on cayenne, fry in grease that's glopped with dust. The sizzle of the feast adds to the din of children strutting slant, their wanderlust and cussing, plus the loud and tactless hiss of dogged hustlers bellowing past gust of peppered breeze, that fatty, fragrant bliss in skillets. All our rampant hunger tricks us into thinking we can dare dismiss the thing men do to boulevards, the wicks their bodies be. A city strapped for art delights in torching them, at first for kicks, to waltz to whirling sparks, but soon those hearts thud thinner, whittled by the chomp of heat. Outlined in chalk, men blacken and blaze apart. Their blindly rising fume is bittersweet, although reversals in the air could fool us into thinking they weren't meant as meat. Our sons don't burn their cities as a rule, born as they are up to their necks in fuel. Also want to thank you. Read this. Don't you hate it when people don't turn the pages down on the poems that they want to read? Here it is. No wound of exit. The body is secured in a blue body bag with medical examiner seal 0000517. Along with him inside the crackling bag are moonlight, shriek, and the entitled groan of vermin. The child was never not secured, but was never secure. He was not apprised of the dangers inherent in the moving forward. So his walk was conjured of averted gaze, perhaps a rapper's lisp, and the spit called rain. The grit of neon sugar works ravage behind his closed mouth. The body is secured in a blue body bag. The body is secured in a blues body bag. The body was crafted to absorb the blues. The body is viewed unclothed. The body is that of a normally developed Black male appearing the stated age of 17 years with a body length of 71 inches and body weight of 158 pounds. The body presents a medium build with average nutrition, normal hydration, and good preservation. Pause for the definition of a normally developed Black male. Avoid the words tomorrow and upright. Rigor mortis is complete and lividity is well developed and fixed on the posterior surfaces of the body. The body is cold to the touch post-refrigeration. Short black hair covers the scalp. The face is unremarkable. The black face so easily turns a given name to knives. It gobbles questionable meat drenched in red heat and hawks the slick black seeds of melons. It has yawning antebellum pleats and is never dark enough for newspapers. Its dance craze is the perp walk. Its favorite hangout is above the fold. It squints in a flashlight's probing shriek and slowly, oh so slowly, repeats its name. It chats in rebellion reverb. It chats in stereotypical. It is not at all dressed correctly for the job interview. It pants a harried onyx in the bushes behind your duplex. It was designed specifically to identify and reverse your wife. It can no longer hurt you. This particular face, markedly unremarkable, is still baby, not yet terrible with veined big eye and buck muscle. There's no chance it will fit around your throat. The tree-lined suburb in your chest is safe for now. There are no fractures, deformities, or amputations. The external genitalia present descended testicles in an unremarkable penis. The buttocks are atraumatic and the anus is intact. Once, a buyer would gingerly handle the penis of a potential purchase, foraging for heft, for hints of tree trunk, for commercial cotton foreskin, for its ability to spew a slick black seed. But dead cancels commerce. Anus intact. The ass of the dead boy was rigorously examined after closing hours. One of the thousands of things gingerly removed from its depths was the steamy jackbooted foot of Florida. The entrance wound is located on the left chest, 17.5 inches below the top of the head, 1 inch to the left of the anterior midline and 1/2 inch below the nipple. Further examination demonstrates the wound tract passes directly from front to back and enters the pleural cavity with perforations of the left anterior 5th intercostal space, pericardial sac, right ventricle of the heart, and the right lower lobe of the lung. There is no wound of exit. A black boy can fold his whole tired self around a bullet. The cartridge is a pinpoint of want, a textbook example of the smallest love. Some slugs are warmer than mothers. The bullet wants the whole of the boy, his snot and insomnia, his crammed pockets and waning current. The bullet strains to romance the blooded one in a way that grinds with lyric. The bullet swoons through his collapsing map, then comes to rest, and the boy simply ends his breathing around it. It does not matter if the boy has a mother. It does not matter if he has a gold mouth. Injuries associated with the entrance wound, perforations of left anterior 5th intercostal space, pericardial sac, right ventricle of the heart, right lower lobe of the lung, with approximately 1,300 milliliters of blood in the right pleural cavity and 1,000 in the left pleural cavity. The collapse of both lungs. A black boy's lungs collapsing. A mother picking up a phone. The same sound. The last poem. It's around the time of my father's birthday. So I wanted to read this. It's called "And He Stays Dead." You can convince your young body to slide on the cloak of savage, bare your teeth toward the clock, and pretend you don't feel the hollow. Or you can slap your own face, winding back time, beating yourself witless until years blur and you convince yourself it isn't real. The hollow is not menaced by your trilling. It decides to take your body inside it. You pile on layers of woolens and fiction, trying to appeal to the hollow as it owns you. Everyone asks, why is your voice so drained, so moon. It's because you are feverishly slipping on mantras that should heal the hollow, but it just grows larger and you flail around inside it. It is shaped so stupidly like a father. You can't find your knees to kneel. The hollow will be damned if it gives you a chance to pray your way out, so you will yourself limp and succumb to damage. Passing days seal the hollow. Daughter, wear your father like a cloak. Flaunt the blue, the gone stink of him. Those woes are yours, crafted to reveal your hollow. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness. Thank you to both Gregory and Patricia. Such a breathtaking and moving reading. I'm just sitting here just taking it in and thinking what amazing work you're both doing. So thank you so much. This is one of those readings I know if I could see everyone, they'd probably have a similar reaction. So it's exciting to hear both the new work from Gregory, some older work and perhaps from Patricia, but just as resonant as ever. So I'm going to kick this off with a couple of questions I had in my mind to ask you. And while I'm doing that, I hope that people in attendance are filling up the chat or the Q&A with questions for you as well. The first that I wanted to ask was, and particularly given Gregory's remarks to begin, both of you have work that talk in various ways about living in the Black body. So I'm wondering if at all, how either the Black arts movement or white supremacy has either changed or impacted your work, or I got a little hint from Gregory that, you know, these are issues that we've been dealing with for a while, so maybe it hasn't. Maybe each of you could speak to that.
You said the Black arts movement?
Black Lives Movement. I may have said that, but I was wrong. Black Lives Movement. Thank you.
Well, it's an interesting connection, right?
Yes.
And I think it speaks to your question. And again, my reading of the moment is the aesthetics of it. And so in the Black arts movement, we had Black is beautiful, right? And there is the celebration of Black culture, Black beauty. And there was my reading of the kind of history of it. There was a willingness or an urgency to call out the structural racism in general in very direct ways. And I think today, there's I think that spirit, I don't know, I'm trying to theorize this on the fly, but I think there's a very similar, I think the trajectory is right in line in that we're still very much concerned with the aesthetic field, right? And how we evaluate what we consider beautiful, how we construct beauty.
Good. And Patricia, I saw you raise your hand a little bit, so
Yeah.
I know you're chomping at the bit.
I don't chomp at bits, Lynn. Wow, it's interesting how there's a white writer that I was with at a residency or a conference or something, and we were talking, you know, in general, kind of about the subject, and he was talking about this train that he imagined writers are on, and they're going from car to car, and they have to kind of fight through all the fiction and stuff and get to the car and sit down and do their writing. And then when I thought about it, I said no, because when the Black writer gets between the cars, somebody's there trying to push them off. You know, it's like there's no smooth path like that, you know. And I was talking to my kid about the 60s not long ago, and we had watched the Chicago 7 or something, and she said, but there was all that possibility and all that revolution, and what happened? You know, what happened to that? And it seems like the Blacks and the whites were working together, and they had friction, but they worked through the friction and everything. I guess in my work, I'm too busy trying to say, and it shouldn't be this way, but I'm constantly trying to say, I'm here. You know, I'm here, my voice is legitimate. All your efforts, all your pushing against me, all the efforts at disappearing have not worked. And sometimes I feel like I have to keep doing that. And so I'm not really able to do a lot of the work that I would want to do if I didn't have that concern. And especially, especially now, I mean, we don't even hear about African Americans' concerns anymore. You know, we're just like so far on the totem pole. We're talking to ourselves about it, but it doesn't seem to be a national consideration anymore. The one thing I do notice that in with poets, all of a sudden, people are starting to look to poetry for the truth. You know, I mean, before it was kind of like, oh, you guys are doing this recreational thing and the performance is nice, and you know, but now since truth is in such short supply, people are realizing that we've been speaking as close to the ground as we can all this time, you know. So outside of the natural concerns of if I'm going to be safe when I walk outside of my house, it puts kind of a pressure on things that I write. I feel like we're shaping a history, even though the history is already there, and we're shaping a future. And where I belong as my own artist self in the midst of that, I don't really know anymore. I feel such a heavy, the community, I think, feels such a heavy responsibility to be visible, to be present, to be staunch against all these forces that are trying to push us backwards. And then where does my own art, the things that I choose to do for myself, where does that fit in? You know, and the Black Lives Matter thing is fun. It's just got another label. It's
Yeah.
it's another label. You know,
Yeah.
it's you know, you know, Greg was talking the Black Power, Black Arts Movement. All you know, we sit and we watch it, and we hope maybe this label will work. You know, maybe
Right.
this one will bring the allies. Maybe this, you know, and yeah, the fact that you have to say, not watch what I do with my life, but first I need to get across to you that, hey, it matters that I'm here. It feels kind of like going backwards to me.
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, and I want you both to go on this. But the second question that I had kind of feeds into or from what you're saying, and that is about the current activism, my word, of certain publishing houses and or literary journals to support Black authors, given that much of it, it seems to me, was spurred by the murder of George Floyd, which for the African American community is not anything new. This is what happens in our communities. So I'm wondering how you view that on the one hand. On the other hand, how lasting do you think the efforts of these publishers will be once Black Lives Matter, or whatever we choose to call it, is no longer grabbing headlines?
Uh,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, just really quickly. That was a lot of it was kind of comical to me. You know, it was something that they had to do. If you didn't do it, you were called out for not doing it, for not making a pronouncement or a declaration or dedicating a page. So much so that, you know, I started getting calls, you know, it's like, well, we haven't had you in our magazine. We don't need, you know, and it reminds me of African American History Month, where I keep getting the same 5 gigs every February because I'm the only African American poet in their Rolodex, you know, and it's like, oh, it's that time again, you know. So I think it was a matter of necessity. You stood out if you did not make a statement. I think that, and we are so a country of the next new thing,
Mhm.
that the attention will fall. You know, I mean, we've got this whole political thing, the new administration, the administration wanting to leave, all that. And it'll probably wane until there's another very public videotaped murder. You know, I think that the George Floyd murder sort of moved in with the restlessness that we had with the administration that we had, and these things just going unnoticed. And this was so blatant that it couldn't be. But if you think about what has happened since with the policemen, you know, they're raising a bunch of money for them. And, you know, it's already become kind of this iconic moment with no real movement behind it. You know, so the declarations that were made, I think well, I'm not saying every publisher, and this was a lot of journals and a lot of online sites, they're going to hope that it's going to last them for a while. You know,
Right.
I would like to refer you to our Black Lives Matter statement. You know, and that's going to roll with them that's going to roll for a while. I didn't really, it didn't seem like a heartfelt thing. And people who have been publishing Black writers for a long time or not, the time to address that and make it public was way before this. And the fact that it took a man's murder to get you to say, yes, we respect Black people, that feels backwards to me.
Gregory, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the statements, the pronouncements. And at the time, early in the summer, I remember getting a number of during Black History Month, I got a number of emails from people close to me and not so close to me, asking for help crafting these statements, right? And there's kind of, there's a reckoning in that too, right? I mean, you have to acknowledge something's afoot if you don't have it within yourself to actually reach out to craft a statement that is functional. I'm sorry, my wife. Where was I? So if you don't have somebody, if you don't have the discourse rather within your organization already that is prepared to address the moment, then that in itself is an issue. So I agree that there's always this kind of commercial response to it, and it's very commercial this time around in that companies knew, organizations knew that it not only hurt them image-wise, but it had the potential to impact the bottom line. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, I have every confidence that the response will morph in some way to normalize the situation once again and figure out ways to return to the water level of the status quo. But there is, and to go back to the Black arts movement really quickly, I think in that time, I want to keep in mind that Sonia Sanchez, for example, had in her establishing the AFAM department, African American Literature Department, Cultural Department in universities, and how that proliferated and how that created positions for so many Black professors. And I think we certainly within the line of that, the lineage of that. And right now I do celebrate like Lisa Lucas and Parnisha Jones just off the top of my head. And there are so many others who are moving into positions where they have some real influence over the day-to-day functions of within the industry. So would I use the word hopeful? I don't know.
Yeah.
If I go that far, but there are signs that we are in, and that we is very much an African American we. We are in positions to suggest that there is a larger world that we need to take into consideration.
I like that hopeful note. And with that, I think I want to open it up. And Nadine, I know you're going to help me a little bit with the Q&A since I'm no expert here. I do see one question that says it's mostly for Patricia. What is your favorite poem that you wrote for yourself instead of for a cause, and how did you come up with it?
My favorite poem that I wrote for myself is called When the Burning Begins, and I wrote it for my dad. And it's about sitting in the kitchen and him teaching me how to cook. And I can't, it was very strange when I'm a daddy's girl. So when my father died, I was so obsessed with writing the official "My Father is Dead" poem. Like I had to make this big pronouncement, and it had to be this huge, And I spent so much time trying to do that, and I couldn't say my father was dead in a poem because if I did, there would be no chance of magic happening, And so then what I realized I was doing wrong was I needed to take a moment where my father was distinctly my father and I was distinctly me, and have his death be a consequence and not the entire poem. And so I wrote about sitting in the kitchen and him teaching me how to write hot water cornbread. And that is my favorite poem ever of mine, because it taught me how to get from one place in my head to a safer place on something that was very traumatic for me. And showed me the power of poetry to be able to do that and move me sanely from a place where I thought I would never be sane again, and that clicked on with a lot of other poems, difficult poems after that. So I think that's why.
Excellent. Gregory, here's one for you. How was it making the transition from poetry to memoir writing? What was the most challenging part of that process?
Well, moving from the line to the sentence is just recalibrating the machinery of the like think of it like a factory. I got to retrofit all the machinery. I guess honestly, it's not very different. I don't find a huge difference because there's similar concerns about form, similar concerns about the lyric, the similar modulation between lyric and narrative. And so I find that I guess I should qualify that. I'm not so much writing, I don't think of myself so much as a memoirist as I am a personal essayist. And so writing personal essay is perhaps slightly different genre from the sort of conventional memoir.
Okay. Another question for both of you, I think, how much of your art is about being and maybe you answered this in part, but I think this will really nail it down, a Black poet versus being a poet. I am thinking about this in relationship to how women can be identified as a woman artist and not just as an artist.
I understand that when somebody sees my picture on the back of a book or I step onto a stage that all these synapses fire and they've got a pretty good idea. They think about what kind of work I'm going to do. But I was raised believing that what I was seeing on television and what my parents were mostly talking to me about was the mainstream. Both my parents came up from the South. They, at least one of them, thought that the whiter and the more I can be surrounded by white things and talk white and dress white and be nice around white people and get good jobs because they give you things that I mean, that was pounded into me. So much so that I'd be sitting next to my mom watching television and she would pinch my nose because she thought my nose was too broad. So it's no problem for me to write in any direction because that's what I was accustomed to, So I don't think I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write a Black poem, I'm going to write one of the revelations as a poet was realizing that the whole damn world belonged to me, and despite what their expectations were as to what I was supposed to write, that idea of that constant attempt to categorize you, no matter how long you go, you know, panels you get put on, and you know, things you get asked to do, and you go, what, you know, it's like, you know, in another way, it's like the whole performance poetry thing, because I started poetry by getting up on stage. So anybody who wants to take me down a couple of notches will say something like, oh, you're that slam poet, right? You know, and imagine someone say, oh, that's right. So you're going to do some Black poems tonight. You know, we're everywhere. I hate to break it to some of you people. We're everywhere. We're in every experience. We're in every environment. We, you know, we have adventures. We explore. We make mistakes. You know, so of course, everything that comes to the page is filtered through me, and I am Black before I'm anything else. You know, I think I'm Black before I'm a woman. Yeah, so, you know, the choices I make are very much defined by that, but the directions I go in are not defined in that same way.
Interesting way to put it. Gregory?
Yeah, I would echo everything I do is always already Black. And I think I'm reminded, Patricia, of something you said earlier about the train, right? And that reminds me of Gwendolyn Brooks's First Fight Then Fiddle. Right? You have to fight to civilize a space in which to make your art, right? And so I think there are two kind of prongs to the way I think about this issue. One is, as Patricia was saying earlier, and that is me at my desk. What I want to do, the strategies that I take are, one, fighting to create a space in which I am free of, to whatever extent I can. I don't think it's entirely possible, at least I haven't been able to do it, free of the sense of, the pervasive sense of surveillance and suspicion that is on me at all times as I move through society, right? I want to shed, to whatever extent I can, shed that. As far as race, I think of racism is another register that I have, or rather, let me put it this way: identity consists for me in my writing practice, which is different from in the world. Identity is a number of registers of intimacy that I can move into, that I can use to signal to my reader, I'm with you on this level. I see you, you know, you and me, right, as we move through the poem. And another trick that I have is, and I don't think it's a trick at all, is to understand that everyone is a Black writer. Some people are just more conscious of it than others.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. And that surveillance and suspicion, I'll be thinking about that for a long time. Nadine, I know that we want to do some final close-up things. I don't know if we have time for more questions. I apologize we didn't get to everyone's. Maybe you can tell me where we are time-wise.
How about one final question?
Okay, let me see what I have here. From Ralph Black, he says, Thoreau said we should live lives that are a, quote, counter friction to the machine, close quote. 150 years later, do you think the same can or even should be said of poetry? Counter friction to the machinery of systemic racism, for example?
I can start.
Go for it, Gregory, yeah.
So my beloved friend, Vivi Francis, taught me that to think about, or gave me the tool that is to think about poetry as on one end of the scale, perhaps there is the poetry of affirmation, right? And that is poetry that, as Patricia pointed out earlier, in some senses is, I am here with you, we are here together. And that it has a different kind of frequency, I think, and certainly emotional frequency, than the poem, I guess on the far edge of that scale is the poem of protest, right? And that is, I am overtly countering the status quo in as detailed a manner as I possibly can. I like to think that art inherently disrupts and unsettles the mind, right? If it's not actually spurring new thoughts or exciting the mind, then it's not doing a whole lot for the reader or for the viewer or the consumer. So I think we're all kind of figuring out where along the scale we want to be at any moment in time. And I think very often a single poem will modulate in back and forth along that scale.
Absolutely. Patricia, did you have any thoughts on that? Your mute is on.
I like that friction thing. How many times have I said that? Anyway, I think that the very fact that we are standing upright and continuing to do what we do in the face of so many forces saying that what we do doesn't matter, that it's not being heard. If there were no books, if there were no audiences, I have no doubt, and I'm going to speak for Gregory too, that we would still be writing. We'd still be writing. I mean, part of it is sometimes you're kind of yelling into the void, but there's some strength that you garner in the yelling, in the sound of your own voice, And other times we don't see the people who are really listening. It's like having a student come back to you after 3 years or something and say that one thing you told me, or quote a line or something that you said you really don't know. So it's always worth the fight. It's always worth the fight. It's worth feeling like you're writing to yourself sometimes. And it's what I really treasure right now is the strength of the community, that we have each other to talk about, ways to stay safe within this space, ways to gain strength within the space, talk about how to get our voices into places where they weren't before, and so we're not alone by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, what I think I'm feeling, and I'm sure the audience is feeling, is what I treasure is having the two of you. You have filled us up so much in this hour. So grateful that you let me be a small part of it, and it was wonderful to hear your voices. Nadine, do you want to take us home?
I couldn't have said it any better. Thank you so much to all three of you, Patricia, Gregory, and Lynn, for truly a thought-provoking event. We are honored, and it's really been a pleasure and a privilege. And I'm just going to say good night. Please stay safe, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see everyone soon.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.